The fire in the great hall had already died down to orange embers, but Elena could still feel heat crawling up her arms as she stood before the entire pack. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from disbelief. Cade stood a few steps away from her, his jaw tight, his golden eyes darker than she had ever seen them. This was not the man who had held her only 2 nights ago and whispered promises against her skin. This was a stranger wearing his face. "Say it again," Cade said, his voice low and dangerous, carrying across the silent hall. "Tell them what you did." "I did nothing," Elena said, her voice steady, even though her heart was breaking apart inside her chest. "Cade, look at me. You know me. You know this is not true." Draven stepped forward from the shadows near the throne, his expression carefully arranged into something that looked like sorrow, though Elena could see the satisfaction hiding underneath it. He held up a torn piece of fabric, dark red, stained with a scent that was not hers, yet somehow carried traces of her essence woven into it, through means she could not explain. "My king," Draven said, bowing his head slightly. "I did not want to be the one to bring this forward, but the pack deserves the truth. This was found near the eastern border, close to where your Luna was seen meeting with an outsider 3 nights ago." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elena searched the sea of faces for anyone who might defend her, anyone who might question the evidence being presented so easily, so conveniently. She found only lowered eyes and folded arms. Fear had a way of silencing even the kindest hearts when a king's fury filled the room. "I was never at the eastern border," Elena said. "Cade, I was here. I was with your mother, in the herb garden. She can tell you. Ask her." Cade's eyes flickered, just for a moment, toward the corner of the room where his mother should have been standing. But she was not there. Elena's stomach dropped. Someone had made sure the one witness who could clear her name was absent tonight. "She is resting," Draven said smoothly, as if reading the king's thoughts. "She has been unwell." Elena felt the walls of the hall pressing closer, the air growing thin around her. She placed a hand instinctively over her stomach, a small gesture that she hoped no one would notice, though of course, someone always noticed everything in a room full of wolves. Cade's gaze dropped to her hand, and for a heartbeat, something softened in his expression. Then Draven spoke again, his voice smooth as poison sliding into a wound. "There is more, my king. The child she carries. Are you certain it is yours?" The words landed like a blow. Elena staggered back a step, her mouth opening in shock, unable to find words fast enough to defend herself against something so cruel, so calculated, so far beyond anything she could have imagined even her worst enemy saying aloud in front of an entire pack. "That is not true," she whispered. "Cade, please. You know this child is yours. You know what we shared. Do not let him do this to us." But something had already shifted behind Cade's eyes. The mate bond between them, once a warm thread connecting their hearts no matter the distance, now felt tangled and cold, poisoned by doubt that had been planted with careful, patient cruelty over weeks Elena had never noticed. She realized too late that Draven had not built this trap in one night. He had been laying stones for this moment for a long time, waiting for the perfect night to spring it. "Cade," she said again, softer this time, reaching a hand toward him. "Please. Look at me. Really look at me." He did look at her, but what he saw was clouded by rage, humiliation in front of his own pack, and a wound to his pride that no logic could reach in that moment. Alphas were proud creatures, and a king even more so. The thought that his Luna, his mate, the woman carrying his child, might have betrayed him in front of everyone he ruled, was a fire that burned away his reason entirely. "Take her to the border," Cade said, his voice cracking on the last word, though he masked it quickly with anger. "She is no longer welcome in this pack. She is no longer my Luna." The hall erupted into murmurs, some shocked, some strangely eager, as if the drama of it all excited something dark in people who had grown bored of peace. Elena felt hands grip her arms, guards she had once trained alongside, men who had sworn to protect her, now dragging her toward the great doors, as though she were a criminal, rather than the woman who had once healed their king's broken heart after his father's passing. "Cade!" she screamed, fighting against the guard's grip, though she knew fighting would do nothing against wolves stronger than her. "This is your child. You are casting out your own child." For one moment, just one, Cade's composure cracked. His eyes shimmered, and his hand twitched at his side, as if he wanted to reach for her, to stop this, to undo the words that were already tearing through the air like claws through flesh. But Draven placed a steady hand on his shoulder, murmuring something only Cade could hear, and whatever hesitation had flickered in the king's eyes vanished beneath a mask of stone. "Take her," Cade repeated, turning his back before she could see the truth in his expression. "Now." The guards pulled her through the doors, out into the cold night air, past the stone pillars that marked the edge of pack territory. Elena's bare feet dragged against gravel and dirt, her silk gown, once chosen with such joy for what was supposed to be a celebration of her pregnancy, now torn and dirtied beyond recognition. At the border, the guards released her without ceremony. One of them, a young wolf named Callum who had once brought her flowers as thanks for tending his injured sister, lingered for a moment, his eyes full of an apology he did not dare speak aloud. "I am sorry, Luna," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. "I do not believe what they say about you. But I cannot go against the king's word." "Then you already know the truth," Elena said, tears finally breaking free down her cheeks. "Tell someone. Tell anyone who will listen." Callum's eyes darted nervously toward the other guards, already turning to leave. "I will try," he said, before jogging to catch up with the others, leaving Elena alone, at the edge of the only home she had ever truly loved. The forest beyond the border stretched dark and unfamiliar, filled with sounds that did not belong to her pack's territory. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the first true wave of fear settle into her bones, not fear for herself, but for the small life growing inside her, a life that deserved so much more than betrayal, before it had even taken its first breath. She began to walk, though she did not know where. Every step away from the pack's borders felt like tearing a piece of her own heart out and leaving it behind on the ground. She thought of the nursery she and Cade had begun preparing together, painted soft green, because they had agreed to be surprised by whether their child would be a boy or a girl. She thought of the way Cade used to press his palm against her stomach every morning, whispering promises to a child who could not yet understand words, but who Elena was certain could feel love all the same. How had it all crumbled so quickly? How had years of trust been unraveled by a single night of lies? As dawn approached, Elena's strength finally gave out. Her legs, exhausted from hours of walking without direction, buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the damp forest floor, her vision blurring at the edges. The last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of footsteps approaching, human footsteps, unfamiliar and gentle, and a voice calling out in concern. "Miss? Miss, can you hear me? Stay with me, all right? I've got you." Then everything went black. When Elena opened her eyes again, she was lying on a soft bed in a room she did not recognize, sunlight streaming gently through white curtains. A man with kind brown eyes and gray hair at his temples sat in a chair beside the bed, watching her with quiet concern. He looked to be in his 50s, dressed in simple clothes, with the calm, steady presence of someone who had spent his life caring for others. "There you are," he said gently, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "You gave me quite a scare. I found you collapsed near the old forest trail. My name is Marcus. I am a doctor here in the village nearby. You are safe now." Elena tried to sit up, panic flooding back into her chest as the memories of the previous night crashed over her all at once. Marcus placed a steady hand on her shoulder, guiding her gently back down against the pillows. "Easy now," he said. "You and the baby are both fine, but you need rest. Whatever happened to you, whatever you are running from, you do not have to explain it to me right now. You are safe in my home for as long as you need." Tears filled Elena's eyes again, though this time they were tears of a strange, cautious relief. This man, a complete stranger, someone who owed her nothing, had shown her more kindness in a single sentence than her own mate had shown her in their final moments together. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I do not know how to repay you." Marcus shook his head gently. "You do not owe me anything, just rest. Everything else can wait." Elena closed her eyes, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, and for the first time since the trial in the Great Hall, she allowed herself to breathe. She did not know what the future held, did not know how she would survive without her pack, without her title, without the man she had once believed would stand beside her forever. But she knew one thing, with absolute certainty, as she drifted back into an exhausted sleep. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices she had to make, She would protect this child with everything she had, even if it meant hiding forever from the world she had once called home. Outside the small cottage, the sun rose fully over the horizon, casting long golden light across the quiet village, a place far removed from pacts and thrones and cruel accusations. A place where, for now, Elena could begin to heal, even as a part of her heart remained forever tangled in the golden eyes of the king who had let her fall. Days passed slowly in the small cottage at the edge of the village. Marcus never asked too many questions, though Elena could tell. He suspected there was far more to her story than a simple accident on a forest trail. He brought her warm meals, extra blankets, and books to pass the time, treating her not as a burden, but as someone worth caring for without conditions. On the third morning, Elena finally found the strength to sit by the window and watch the village below. Children ran through the narrow streets, laughing, chasing a small dog between market stalls. Women carried baskets of bread and vegetables, calling greetings to one another. It was such an ordinary scene, so different from the world she had left behind, a world of pack hierarchies, moon ceremonies, and the constant weight of being watched, judged, and measured against impossible standards. She thought of Cade often, though she tried not to. She thought of the way he used to laugh, rare and unguarded, only in her presence. She thought of the night he had proposed the mating bond to her, beneath a sky full of stars, promising that no matter what storms came, he would stand beside her. She thought of his hands, always so gentle with her despite his immense strength, and how those same hands had turned her away without a second glance. It was Draven's face that haunted her most, in the quiet hours before sleep. She replayed every interaction she had ever had with him, searching for the moment she had missed, the sign that should have warned her he was capable of such cruelty. He had always been polite to her, respectful even, though something about his eyes had never quite reached warmth. She had dismissed it as simple reserve. Now she understood, it had been patience, the patience of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. "You are thinking too hard again," Marcus said one afternoon, setting a cup of tea beside her on the small table near the window. "I can see it on your face." Elena managed a small, tired smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Painfully," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "You do not have to tell me anything, but sometimes speaking things aloud helps more than staying silent with them." Elena wrapped her hands around the warm cup, staring down at the gentle steam rising from it. "I was betrayed," she said quietly, choosing her words carefully, aware that she could never reveal the full truth of what she was. "By people I trusted completely. By someone I loved. I lost everything in a single night, my home, my place in the world, and the respect of people I once called family." Marcus nodded slowly, no judgment in his expression. "And the father of your child?" Elena's throat tightened. "He believed the lies," she whispered. "He chose to believe the lies over me." "Then he was a fool," Marcus said simply. No anger in his voice, only quiet certainty. "Any man who cannot see the truth standing right in front of him does not deserve to keep it." Elena felt fresh tears prick at her eyes, though these were different from the tears of grief she had cried in the forest. These were tears of gratitude, for a stranger's unwavering kindness, in a moment when she had believed kindness no longer existed for her. As the weeks passed, Elena grew stronger, both in body and in spirit. She began helping Marcus around his small clinic, discovering that her years of tending to injured pack members had given her a natural skill for herbal medicine and wound care that the village folk quickly came to appreciate. She kept her true nature hidden as best she could, training herself to move slower, to breathe evenly, even when her senses screamed with information no human could perceive, to mask the strength that could otherwise reveal what she truly was. It was not easy. There were nights when the pull of the full moon made her entire body ache with a longing to run free through the forest, to howl beneath the silver light in a way that felt as natural as breathing. She learned to lock herself away during those nights, biting back the transformation through sheer force of will, terrified that even the smallest slip could endanger the safe, quiet life she was building for her unborn child. She also felt the mate bond still humming faintly in her chest, a quiet, persistent thread connecting her to Cade no matter the distance between them. Some nights it ached so fiercely she could hardly breathe, a physical reminder of a connection that exile could weaken but never fully sever. She wondered if he felt it too, wherever he was, or if his anger had built walls thick enough to block it out entirely. One evening, as autumn began to paint the leaves outside in shades of gold and red, Elena felt the first true kick from within her stomach. She gasped, pressing her palm against the gentle movement, tears springing instantly to her eyes. Marcus, who had been reading nearby, looked up with a warm smile. "Everything all right?" "The baby just moved," Elena said, laughing through her tears, an unfamiliar lightness blooming in her chest for the first time in weeks. "I felt it. I actually felt it." Marcus set his book aside and came to sit beside her, his expression soft with genuine happiness for her. "That is a wonderful sign," he said. "Strong and healthy, just like its mother." Elena rested both hands over her stomach, feeling the small flutter of movement again, and for the first time since that terrible night in the Great Hall, she allowed herself to imagine a future. Not the future she had once planned with Cade, filled with thrones and pact ceremonies and a love she had believed unbreakable. A different future. Smaller, quieter, but entirely her own, built on her own strength, for a child who would grow up knowing only love and safety, never the cruelty of a world that judged first, and listened never. She did not know yet how difficult that future would be to build alone. She did not know how many sacrifices lay ahead, how many sleepless nights spent worrying over money, safety, and the ever-present fear of being found. But in that quiet moment, with the gentle kick of her child beneath her palm, and the steady, comforting presence of a man who asked for nothing in return for his kindness, Elena allowed herself one small, precious feeling: hope. Far away, in the stone halls of the Blackthorn Pack, Cade stood alone on his balcony overlooking the moonlit forest, his hand pressed unconsciously against his own chest, over a heart that ached with a pain he could not explain, a pain that had begun the very night he let his Luna walk away into the darkness alone. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the village in a thick layer of snow that made the narrow streets glisten under pale morning light. Elena had grown accustomed to her new life by then, though accustomed did not mean easy. Every day brought a fresh reminder of everything she had lost, even as she built something new, brick by careful brick, in a world that had no idea what she truly was. She had grown large with pregnancy now, her due date approaching faster than she felt ready for. Marcus insisted she rest more, though Elena found it difficult to sit idle when there was always something to do: herbs to sort, bandages to fold, patients to greet with a warm smile, even when her own heart still carried invisible wounds that refused to fully close. One cold afternoon, a stranger arrived at the clinic, a tall man with sharp eyes, who claimed to be searching for a woman matching Elena's description, someone who had gone missing from a neighboring town. Elena's blood ran cold the moment she saw him standing in the doorway, his gaze sweeping the small waiting room with a precision that felt far too calculated for an ordinary traveler. She kept her head down, pretending to sort through a stack of paperwork at the counter, praying he would not recognize the scent she had worked so hard to mask. Marcus, sensing her unease though not understanding its cause, stepped smoothly between the stranger and Elena, his tone polite but firm. "I am afraid we have not seen anyone matching that description," Marcus said. "This is a small village. New faces tend to stand out, and we have had none recently." The stranger's eyes lingered a moment too long on Elena's bent head, before he finally nodded, thanking Marcus for his time, and stepping back out into the cold. Elena did not release the breath she had been holding, until the sound of his footsteps faded completely down the street. "Was that about you?" Marcus asked quietly, once the door had closed. Elena nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she set down the papers she had been pretending to organize. "I think someone may still be looking for me," she admitted. "I do not know if it is safe for me to stay here much longer." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than alarmed. "Then we will make sure you are harder to find," he said simply. "There is a small house at the edge of my property, quiet, private, surrounded by trees. It has been empty for years. You could stay there instead, away from the main road, away from prying eyes." Elena felt a fresh wave of gratitude threaten to overwhelm her. "Why do you keep helping me?" she asked, unable to hold the question back any longer. "You do not even know me. You do not know what I am running from, and yet you have given me everything, without asking for anything in return." Marcus offered her a gentle, knowing smile, the kind that came from a man who had lived long enough to understand pain intimately. "Because a long time ago, someone helped me when I had nothing," he said. I promised myself I would do the same for someone else one day, if I ever had the chance. You needed help. That is reason enough. That night, Elena moved into the small house at the edge of Marcus's property, grateful for the added privacy, though the isolation brought its own quiet challenges. She spent long hours alone, with only her thoughts for company, and increasingly, those thoughts drifted back to Cade, wondering if he had discovered the truth yet, wondering if Draven's lies had finally begun to unravel, wondering if her old pack even remembered her name anymore. She dreamed of him often, dreams so vivid she woke with tears already streaming down her face, dreams where he found her, where he fell to his knees and begged forgiveness, where their child was born, surrounded by love instead of secrecy and fear. She always woke from those dreams to the same quiet, empty house, the same distant ache in her chest where the mate bond still lingered stubbornly despite everything. As her due date grew closer, Elena began preparing the small house as best she could, folding tiny blankets, arranging a simple wooden cradle Marcus had built for her with his own hands, refusing any payment for the labor of love he had poured into every careful joint and polished edge. "You did not have to do this," Elena said, running her fingers over the smooth wood, one evening, as snow fell steadily outside the window. "I wanted to," Marcus replied simply. "Every child deserves a place to sleep that was made with care." Elena felt her heart swell with something close to peace, a fragile, cautious peace she had not believed herself capable of feeling again after that terrible night in the Great Hall. She was building a life here, small and quiet, but real. A life where her child would grow up safe, loved, and free from the cruelty of a world that had turned its back on her so easily. She did not yet know that her body carried a secret even greater than she realized, a secret that would reveal itself in the most unexpected way possible, when the time finally came for her child to enter the world. The first contraction came in the middle of a snowstorm, sharp and sudden, stealing the breath from Elena's lungs as she gripped the edge of the kitchen table for support. She had known this day was coming, had prepared herself as best she could, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the fear that gripped her heart as she realized she was entirely alone in the small house, with the storm raging too fiercely outside for her to easily reach Marcus's home, just beyond the tree line. She took a slow, steadying breath, calling on every ounce of strength she had built over the past months. She was Elena, once Luna of the Blackthorn Pack, a woman who had survived betrayal, exile, and isolation, with her head held high. She would not let fear win now, not when her child needed her most. With trembling hands, she reached for the small bell Marcus had given her weeks earlier, ringing it as loudly as she could manage through another wave of pain, praying the sound would carry far enough through the howling wind to reach him in time. Marcus arrived within minutes, his coat dusted white with snow, medical bag already in hand, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment for weeks. He found Elena on the floor near the fireplace, breathing hard through another contraction, sweat beading on her forehead despite the winter cold seeping through the walls. "You are doing wonderfully," Marcus said, kneeling beside her, his voice calm and steady in the way only years of medical experience could produce. "Just breathe with me. In and out, that is it." Elena nodded, gripping his hand tightly as another wave of pain washed over her. Hours passed in a blur of pain, effort, and Marcus's steady, reassuring presence, the storm outside howling as fiercely as the effort within, until finally, just before dawn, the small house filled with the sound of a baby's first cry. "A boy," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, as he carefully wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a soft blanket. A strong, healthy boy. Elena reached for her son with trembling arms, tears streaming freely down her face, as she held him for the first time, marveling at the impossibly small fingers wrapping instinctively around her own. His eyes, when they opened briefly, were a striking shade of gold, unmistakably his father's eyes, and Elena's heart clenched with a bittersweet ache at the sight. But before she could fully process the joy of the moment, another wave of pain gripped her body, sharp and unexpected. "Elena?" Marcus asked, alarm flickering across his features. "Is something wrong?" "I do not know," Elena gasped, gripping the edge of the blanket beneath her. "It feels like it is happening again." Marcus's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "There is another one," he said, quickly setting the newborn boy into the small cradle nearby, before returning his full attention to Elena. "You are having twins." The revelation struck Elena with equal parts shock and overwhelming emotion. She had never once suspected she carried two lives within her, had never felt any indication beyond the normal aches and movements of a single pregnancy. But there was no time to dwell on the surprise as another contraction gripped her, more intense than any before it. Nearly an hour later, as the first pale light of dawn broke through the snow clouds outside, a second cry filled the small house, softer than her brother's but no less determined. "A girl," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, as he placed the tiny infant into Elena's waiting arms. A beautiful, healthy girl. Elena held both her children close, one in each arm, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and immediate, it nearly stole the breath from her lungs entirely. Her daughter's eyes, when they finally opened, held the same striking gold as her brother's, unmistakable proof of the bloodline they carried within them. A bloodline that had once promised them a throne, now hidden away in a small house at the edge of a quiet human village. "They are perfect," Elena whispered, pressing gentle kisses to each of their foreheads. "Absolutely perfect." Marcus watched the tender scene with a soft, knowing smile. Though something in his expression suggested he understood, there was far more to this family's story than Elena had ever revealed to him. He did not ask questions. He simply reached for a second small blanket, carefully swaddling the newborn girl, while Elena continued cradling her son, the small house filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "Have you thought of names?" Marcus asked gently, once both infants had settled into peaceful, exhausted sleep. Elena considered the question carefully, studying the two small faces before her, already so different despite sharing the same striking golden eyes. Her son had a determined set to his tiny jaw, even in sleep, while her daughter's expression held a softer, more curious quality, as though she were already trying to understand the world around her. "Ronan," Elena said finally, testing the name aloud, "for my son. It means little strong one." "And your daughter?" Marcus asked. Elena brushed a gentle finger across the newborn girl's cheek, watching her tiny features scrunch slightly at the touch. "Ren," she said softly, "small, but never to be underestimated." The name settled into the quiet room like a promise, a declaration that no matter what these children had been born into, no matter the circumstances that had led to their birth in secret and exile, they would grow up strong, loved, and free. The following weeks passed in a haze of sleepless nights and quiet, precious moments that Elena treasured more deeply than she had believed herself capable of after everything she had lost. She learned the rhythm of caring for two infants at once, the exhaustion tempered always by the overwhelming love that filled every corner of the small house. Marcus visited daily, checking on the twins' health, bringing supplies, and offering the kind of quiet, steady support that Elena had come to rely on, more than she had ever expected to rely on anyone again. He never pried into the truth of their origins, though Elena caught him watching the twins sometimes with a thoughtful, curious expression, particularly when Ronan, barely a few weeks old, displayed a grip strength that startled even the experienced doctor. "He is going to be a strong boy," Marcus commented one afternoon, watching as tiny Ronan gripped his finger with surprising force. "Stronger than most infants I have cared for." Elena forced a light laugh, deflecting the observation as best she could. "He takes after his father in that regard," she said, the words carrying more weight than Marcus could possibly understand. As the twins grew from infants into curious toddlers, Elena faced the constant challenge of managing their instincts, teaching them from the earliest possible age to control the strength and senses that came far more naturally to them than to any ordinary human child. It was delicate, careful work, disguised always as simple games and gentle lessons, though Elena knew the stakes behind those lessons were far higher than typical parenting concerns. "Remember," she would whisper to them during quiet moments before sleep, "we do not show others how strong we are. We keep that just between us, all right? It is our special secret." Ronan, even as a young toddler, would nod solemnly, taking the instruction with a seriousness that sometimes broke Elena's heart. A child so young, already understanding the weight of hiding who he truly was. Ren, meanwhile, absorbed everything around her with quiet, watchful eyes, often understanding lessons and warnings before Elena had even finished explaining them, an intuition that felt far beyond her years. Despite the constant vigilance required to keep their true nature hidden, Elena found genuine joy in watching her children grow. Ronan's fierce, protective nature emerged early, always positioning himself between his sister and any perceived threat, whether it was a barking dog in the village square or simply a loud noise that startled her. Ren, in turn, possessed a remarkable ability to calm her brother with nothing more than a gentle touch or a few quiet words, a natural balance between the twins that Elena often marveled at. Marcus remained a constant, steady presence throughout their early years, becoming something close to a grandfather figure in the children's lives, teaching them about herbs and medicine, patiently answering their endless stream of curious questions, and providing a sense of stability that Elena knew was invaluable for children growing up without any connection to their true heritage. Yet even amid the quiet happiness of those years, Elena never fully escaped the shadow of what she had lost. Some nights, after tucking the twins into their small beds, she would sit alone by the window, watching the moon rise over the treetops, feeling the familiar stubborn ache of the mate bond still lingering faintly in her chest. She wondered, as she always did, whether Cade ever thought of her, whether he had ever learned the truth about that terrible night, whether somewhere far away, he too felt the echo of a bond that exile had strained but never truly broken. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she had built a good life for her children, a safe life, and that was enough. But deep down, in the quiet corners of her heart, she rarely allowed herself to examine too closely. Elena knew a part of her would always wonder what might have been, if only the truth had been given the chance to speak louder than the lies that had torn her world apart. While Elena built her quiet life far from the world she had once known, the Blackthorn pack had changed into something colder, harder, and far less alive than it had ever been under her care. Cade ruled with an iron discipline that left little room for warmth, his decisions sharp and efficient, his patience for failure non-existent. The pack obeyed him, respected him even, but few dared approach him with anything beyond formal matters of business. It had taken nearly a year for the truth about that terrible night to fully surface, and when it finally did, it arrived not through confession, but through carelessness. One of Draven's own men, drunk on victory and wine during a private celebration, let slip a boastful comment about how easily the former Beta had manipulated the king into casting out his own Luna. The comment reached the wrong ears, and within days, the truth had spread through the pack like wildfire. Cade had summoned Draven to his private chambers that night, his fury a barely contained storm beneath a mask of deadly calm. Draven, sensing the shift in the wind, had already begun making arrangements to flee, though he was not quick enough to escape entirely unscathed. By the time the confrontation ended, Draven had lost his position, his standing, and very nearly his life, saved only by an ancient pack law forbidding a king from taking a life in personal rage, rather than formal judgment. Draven was exiled that same night, stripped of his rank, and cast beyond the pack borders, with nothing but the clothes on his back, a fate far kinder than what Cade truly wished to deliver upon the man who had destroyed his family with nothing more than a scrap of stolen fabric and a handful of well-placed lies. But exiling Draven did nothing to undo the damage already done. Elena was gone, vanished without a trace, and no search party, no tracker, no desperate use of pack resources could locate even a single hint of where she might have gone. Cade threw himself into the search with a relentless, almost obsessive determination, refusing to accept that the woman he loved, the woman carrying his child, could simply disappear from the world without leaving some thread for him to follow. Months turned into years, and still Cade found nothing. The mate bond remained stubbornly faint in his chest, a constant, torturous reminder that Elena was alive somewhere, though its weakened state made it impossible to trace with any precision, a cruel side effect, he later learned, of the emotional damage the bond itself had suffered during the exile. The pack elders pressed him constantly to consider a new mate, insisting that a king without a Luna created instability, that the bloodline needed securing, that grief, however justified, could not be allowed to rule a kingdom indefinitely. Cade refused every single suggestion, every carefully arranged introduction, every subtle hint dropped by ambitious families hoping to elevate their daughters to the position Elena had once held. "There will be no other Luna," he told the elders time and again, his voice leaving no room for further discussion. Not while there remains even the smallest chance she is still out there. It was a lonely existence, ruling a kingdom while carrying the constant weight of guilt and longing in equal measure. Cade became known throughout neighboring territories as a king who ruled with unmatched strength and discipline, yet carried an unmistakable sorrow behind his eyes that no victory, no expansion of territory, no display of power could ever fully erase. He kept the nursery exactly as it had been left, the soft green walls untouched by dust despite the passing years, a private shrine to the family he had destroyed with his own hands in a single moment of blind, misplaced fury. He visited it rarely, unable to bear the weight of memory it carried, yet unable to bring himself to change a single detail within its walls. Sometimes, late at night, when the pack slept and the halls fell silent, Cade would stand on his balcony, overlooking the vast forest, stretching toward the horizon, wondering if Elena was somewhere beneath that same sky, wondering if their child, now surely old enough to walk and speak and laugh, had inherited her mother's gentle strength, or perhaps something entirely his own. He did not know, in those quiet moments of aching uncertainty, that his children in truth, though he remained unaware of that detail entirely, were growing up strong and healthy, in a small village, not nearly as far away as he had once believed, learning to hide their strength, their senses, and their very identity, from a world that had never given them the chance to know their true heritage. 7 years passed in this manner, Cade ruling with unwavering discipline by day, and drowning in quiet grief by night. The search for Elena, never fully abandoned, but growing steadily colder with each passing season, until an unexpected invitation arrived that would finally set fate back into motion. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, delivered by a formal courier from the Lycan Council, requesting the king's presence at an annual symposium held in a neutral, heavily secured location, where pack leaders, human diplomats, and select gifted individuals gathered to discuss matters of shared interest, including the growing need for safe integration between wolf and human communities. Cade had little interest in attending such gatherings, finding them tedious affairs filled with empty political maneuvering, but this year, the council specifically requested his presence, citing his pack's growing influence and the need for his voice in discussions regarding territory boundaries near expanding human settlements. Reluctantly, he agreed, if only to satisfy the growing pressure from his own advisors, who insisted his continued absence from such events reflected poorly on the pack's standing. The symposium was held in a grand estate, on the outskirts of a large city, its halls filled with a careful mixture of formal wear and quiet, watchful power. Cade moved through the crowded reception hall with practiced ease, exchanging brief, polite conversations with other pack leaders, while his mind remained largely elsewhere, distracted as always by the persistent, quiet ache in his chest that had never fully faded in 7 long years. It happened without warning, a single breath of air carrying a scent so achingly familiar that Cade froze mid-conversation, his entire body going rigid with disbelief. He turned sharply, his golden eyes scanning the crowded room with an intensity that startled the diplomat he had been speaking with only moments before. There, across the room, standing near a group of academy instructors engaged in quiet discussion, was Elena. She looked different, older, her features carrying a quiet strength and confidence that had not been there 7 years earlier, though her eyes, when they finally met his across the crowded room, held the same unmistakable depth he remembered so vividly from countless nights spent gazing into them. Her hair was styled differently, her posture carried none of the softness he remembered, replaced instead by a controlled, guarded composure that spoke of years spent building walls no one had been meant to breach again. Cade felt the mate bond in his chest surge to life with an intensity that nearly buckled his knees. 7 years of faint, distant longing suddenly roaring back into full, overwhelming force, now that its other half stood within actual sight, rather than merely somewhere across an impossibly wide, unknown distance. He moved through the crowd without conscious thought, drawn toward her as though pulled by an invisible thread finally reeled taut after years of dangerous slack. Elena's eyes widened as he approached, her body going equally rigid, her hand instinctively reaching to grip the arm of the woman standing beside her. "Elena," Cade said, his voice barely above a whisper once he finally stood close enough. though the single word carried the weight of 7 years of grief, guilt, and desperate longing, all at once. "Your Majesty," Elena replied, her tone carefully formal, distant, a deliberate wall constructed with obvious intention, though Cade did not miss the slight tremor in her voice that betrayed the calm mask she wore so carefully. "I did not expect to see you here." "Elena," he said again, ignoring the formal title entirely, taking another step closer, despite every instinct in her posture warning him to keep his distance. "I have searched for you for 7 years. I never stopped." Something flickered behind her eyes, pain perhaps, or anger, or a complicated mixture of both, before she straightened her shoulders and took a deliberate step backward, putting distance between them that felt, to Cade, like a physical blow. 7 years is a very long time," Elena said, her voice steady, despite the storm clearly brewing behind her controlled expression. "I built a new life. I do not need rescuing, and I certainly do not owe you any explanations for where I have been or what I have done since that night." "I know," Cade said quickly, desperation creeping into his tone despite his best efforts to remain composed in front of the watching crowd. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But please, Elena, just give me a chance to explain, to apologize properly, to make this right in whatever small way you will allow." Before Elena could respond, a small commotion near the entrance drew both their attention, along with the attention of most of the room. 2 children, a boy and a girl who appeared to be around 7 years old, pushed their way through the crowd with the confident, familiar ease of children who had clearly attended such gatherings before, making their way directly toward Elena. "Mother," the boy said, his golden eyes sharp with alertness as he immediately positioned himself slightly in front of his sister upon noticing the unfamiliar man standing so close to Elena. "Instructor Bram said the demonstration is starting soon." Cade's entire world narrowed to a single devastating point of focus as he stared down at the 2 children now standing beside Elena, their golden eyes unmistakable, their features carrying unmistakable echoes of his own family bloodline stretching back generations. The boy's protective stance, his sharpened alertness toward a perceived stranger, mirrored instincts Cade recognized intimately from his own childhood training. The girl, quieter, more watchful, studied him with an intuitive intensity that felt far too knowing for a child her apparent age. "Elena," Cade said, his voice barely functioning through the shock crashing over him in overwhelming waves. "Are these?" Elena's eyes met his, and for the first time since their confrontation began, the careful, guarded mask slipped entirely, revealing raw, complicated emotion underneath, grief and defiance and exhaustion, all tangled together into a single, devastating look. "Ronan," she said quietly, placing a protective hand on her son's shoulder. "Ren, this is King Cade Blackthorn." The names landed like physical blows, and Cade felt the full weight of 7 lost years crash down upon him all at once, a truth so enormous, so devastating, that for a long, suspended moment, he could not find any words at all. Ronan studied the king with open suspicion, his small chin lifted in a display of protective defiance that reminded Elena painfully of Cade's own stubborn pride. Ren, meanwhile, tilted her head slightly, her golden eyes narrowing with the same quiet, calculating focus she always displayed when working through a puzzle that did not yet make complete sense to her. "Mother," Ren said softly, tugging gently at Elena's sleeve, "why does he smell like us?" The innocent question, spoken with such simple honesty, struck the small group like a thunderclap. Elena closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself before crouching down to meet her daughter's curious gaze directly. "We will talk about that later, sweetheart," she said gently. "Right now, why do you and your brother not go find Instructor Bram for the demonstration? I will join you both very shortly." Ronan hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave his mother alone with the unfamiliar man whose presence had so visibly rattled her composure. But Elena offered him a reassuring nod, and after a long moment, he finally took his sister's hand and led her back through the crowd, though not without casting one final, wary glance over his shoulder. Once the children had disappeared from sight, Cade turned back to Elena, his expression a raw, unguarded mixture of shock, grief, and dawning fury, directed entirely at himself. "7 years," he said, his voice barely steady. "I have a son and a daughter, and I have missed 7 years of their lives. You made your choice 7 years ago, Elena said, though her voice lacked the sharp edge it had carried only moments before, replaced instead by a weary, aching exhaustion. You chose to believe lies over me. I did what I had to do to protect them. I know, Cade said, running a hand through his hair in obvious distress. I know, and there is no excuse I can offer that will ever be enough to undo what I did. But Elena, please, I need to understand. I need to know everything I missed. Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his expression for any trace of the manipulative cruelty that had once destroyed her world so completely. She found none. What she found instead was genuine, devastating grief. A king who had clearly carried the weight of his mistake for every single one of those 7 lost years. Not here, she said finally, glancing around at the crowded reception hall, where curious eyes had already begun drifting toward their private, tense exchange. This is not a conversation for public ears. Cade nodded immediately, grateful for even the smallest concession. Anywhere you choose, he said, whenever you are ready. I will not push you further than you are willing to go. They arranged to meet later that evening, in a quiet, private garden, attached to the estate, away from the crowds and prying eyes of the symposium's other attendees. When Elena arrived, she found Cade already waiting, pacing slowly beneath the shadow of a large oak tree, his usual composed, regal bearing, replaced by something far more vulnerable and human. Tell me everything, he said, the moment she approached, his voice quiet, pleading. Please. Elena took a steadying breath before beginning, recounting the difficult early months after her exile, the kindness of a human doctor named Marcus, who had asked for nothing in return for his help, the terrifying night the twins had been born during a fierce winter storm, and the years since spent carefully raising 2 children who carried a bloodline they knew almost nothing about. Cade listened in silence, his jaw tightening with barely controlled emotion at each new detail, guilt and grief warring visibly across his features as he absorbed the full weight of everything his blind, misplaced rage had cost him. They do not know what they are, Elena said finally. I have taught them to control their strength, to hide their instincts, but I have never told them the full truth about their heritage. I did not know how to explain a world that had rejected us both so completely. I want to know them, Cade said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to be part of their lives, if you will allow it. I do not expect forgiveness, Elena. I do not deserve it. But please, do not keep them from me any longer than you already have. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, torn between the protective instincts she had spent 7 years building and the undeniable truth that her children deserved the chance to know their father, provided he could prove himself worthy of that role, through actions rather than simply words spoken in a moment of overwhelming guilt. This will not be easy, she said finally. I will not simply hand them over to a world that once cast us out without hesitation. If you truly want to be part of their lives, you will have to earn that place, slowly, carefully, on my terms and theirs, not yours. I understand, Cade said immediately, relief and determination mingling in his expression. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I will earn it. Elena studied him for a long, searching moment, weighing 7 years of hard-won independence against the quiet, persistent hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her children deserved the chance to know a father who was finally willing to fight for their trust rather than simply demanding it. Very well, she said finally. But know this, Cade. If you hurt them, if you disappoint them, the way you once disappointed me, I will not hesitate to disappear again. And this time, I promise you, you will never find us. Cade nodded solemnly, the weight of her warning settling firmly across his shoulders. I understand completely, he said. I will not fail them. I will not fail either of you again. As the evening deepened around them, casting long shadows across the quiet garden, neither Elena nor Cade could have predicted just how quickly their fragile, cautious truce would be tested by dangers neither of them yet realized were already gathering on the horizon, drawn by whispers of a king's long-lost heirs, finally stepping into the light after 7 years of careful, hidden shadow. The following morning, Cade requested a proper introduction to his children, though Elena insisted on setting strict boundaries before allowing any such meeting to take place. They would meet in a neutral, public setting first, a quiet park near the estate, where Ronan and Ren often played during breaks between symposium activities, and Cade would be introduced simply as an old friend of their mother's, nothing more, until Elena felt confident enough in his intentions to reveal the full truth. Cade arrived at the appointed time, dressed far more casually than his usual formal attire, an obvious attempt to appear less intimidating to two children who had every reason to view him with caution. He found Elena sitting on a bench near a small pond, watching as Ronan and Wren tossed breadcrumbs to a small group of ducks gathered at the water's edge. "Remember what we discussed," Elena said quietly as Cade approached, her tone carrying a clear warning beneath its calm surface. "Slow, patient. Their trust is not something you can simply demand." "I remember," Cade said, settling onto the opposite end of the bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I will follow your lead entirely." Ronan noticed the king's approach first, his small body immediately tensing, with the same protective alertness he had displayed the previous evening. He moved closer to his sister, positioning himself slightly in front of her despite the peaceful, harmless nature of the park setting around them. "Ronan, Wren," Elena called gently. "Come here for a moment. There is someone I would like you to meet properly." The twins approached cautiously, Ronan's golden eyes never leaving Cade's face, studying him with a scrutiny far beyond his apparent years. Wren, meanwhile, studied him with her characteristic quiet curiosity, tilting her head slightly as she took in every detail of his appearance. "This is Cade," Elena said carefully. "He is an old friend of mine, from a very long time ago, before you were born." "You looked sad when you talked to him yesterday," Wren observed with startling directness, her sharp intuition cutting straight through the carefully constructed introduction. "And you look sad now, too." Elena felt her breath catch at her daughter's perceptive observation, exchanging a brief, uncertain glance with Cade, before responding as gently as she could manage. "Sometimes old friends carry complicated feelings," she said, "but that does not mean we cannot try to build something new." Cade crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to eye level with the two children, careful to keep his movements slow and unthreatening. "I have heard wonderful things about both of you," he said, his voice gentler than either child had likely ever heard a king's voice sound. "Your mother tells me you are both very brave and very clever." Ronan crossed his arms, unimpressed by the compliment, his suspicion clearly not so easily won over. "Why does it matter what she told you?" he asked bluntly. "We do not know you." "You are right," Cade said, surprising both children with his immediate, honest agreement, rather than any attempt to argue or dismiss the boy's blunt challenge. "You do not know me at all, and that is entirely fair. I would like the chance to change that, if you will allow it, but only if you are comfortable with that idea." Wren studied him for a long, thoughtful moment, before speaking again. "Mother says trust has to be earned," she said simply, "not just given because someone asks for it." Cade felt a fierce, complicated swell of pride at his daughter's words, recognizing immediately the careful lessons Elena had clearly instilled in both children throughout their young lives. "Your mother is very wise," he said, "and she is absolutely right." Over the following days, as the symposium continued, Cade made careful, patient efforts to spend time with his children, under Elena's watchful supervision, never pushing beyond the boundaries she had established, never demanding more closeness than the twins were willing to offer. He learned that Ronan possessed a natural talent for strategy games, quickly besting even seasoned adult opponents in matches of skill and patience. He learned that Wren possessed an almost uncanny ability to sense the emotions of those around her, often offering quiet, comforting words exactly when they were needed most. Slowly, cautiously, the walls both children had instinctively raised began to soften, though neither fully trusted the unfamiliar king who had suddenly appeared in their lives. Elena watched these developing interactions with a complicated mixture of hope and lingering caution, unable to fully release the protective instincts that had guided every decision she had made over the past 7 years. One evening, after the twins had finally drifted off to sleep in the guest quarters, Elena and the children had been provided for the duration of the symposium. Cade found Elena alone, on a private balcony, overlooking the estate's expansive gardens, moonlight casting a soft silver glow across her features. "They are remarkable children," he said quietly, joining her at the balcony railing, careful to maintain a respectful distance, despite the powerful pull of the mate bond, still humming persistently in his chest. "You have done an incredible job raising them." "I did what I had to do," Elena said simply, though a small, genuine warmth crept into her tone at the compliment. They deserved better than what happened to us, and I refused to let that injustice define their entire lives. I owe you more than I could ever possibly repay, Cade said, his voice heavy with the weight of years spent carrying unbearable guilt. Not just for raising them, but for surviving everything I put you through. I think about that night constantly, Elena. I think about how easily I let Draven's lies destroy everything that mattered most to me. Elena turned to face him fully, her expression carrying none of the sharp defensiveness from their earlier conversations, replaced instead by a quiet, weary honesty. I have thought about that night too, she admitted. For a long time, I hated you for it. I hated how easily you believed the worst of me, how quickly you let pride and rage override everything we had built together. You have every right to hate me, Cade said softly. I would understand completely if you never forgave me. But I do not hate you anymore, Elena continued, as though he had not spoken. Not the way I once did. I have had 7 years to process what happened, to understand that grief and anger cannot sustain a person forever, without eventually consuming them entirely. I built a new life, Cade, a good life, and I refuse to let old wounds poison the peace I finally found. Does that mean there is hope? Cade asked, his voice carrying a fragile note of desperate optimism he could not fully suppress. Hope for us, for our family, for everything we lost? Elena considered the question carefully before responding, her gaze drifting toward the moonlit gardens stretching out below them. I do not know, she said honestly. I am willing to let you build a relationship with Ronan and Ren, slowly, on their terms. But rebuilding trust between us, that is something entirely different. Something I am not certain can simply be rushed back into existence after everything that happened. Cade nodded, accepting her honest answer without argument or protest. Then I will wait, he said simply, for as long as it takes. I have already waited 7 years, Elena. I can wait however much longer is necessary to prove I have truly changed. They stood together in comfortable, contemplative silence for a long while after that, two people carrying the weight of a shared, painful history, cautiously navigating the delicate path toward whatever future might still be possible between them. While far beyond the peaceful estate gardens, a familiar figure watched from the shadows of a nearby tree line, his expression twisted with bitter resentment at the sight of the family he had once so carefully torn apart, now slowly, painfully finding its way back toward healing. Draven had learned of the symposium through old contacts still loyal to his cause, and the moment he had glimpsed Elena and the twins arriving alongside the king, a dark, calculating plan had already begun forming in his mind. 7 years of exile had done nothing to diminish his ambition, only sharpened it into something far more dangerous, and he had no intention of allowing his carefully orchestrated downfall to remain permanent, not when such valuable leverage had just conveniently placed itself directly within his reach once again. The symposium concluded 3 days later, and Elena returned home to her academy with the twins, though the arrangement with Cade continued through carefully scheduled visits, each one bringing father and children slowly, cautiously closer together. Cade traveled frequently to the quiet town where Elena had built her respected training academy, always mindful of her boundaries, always careful never to overstep the fragile trust they had begun rebuilding. Elena's academy had grown into a well-regarded institution over the years, training gifted human and hybrid children in discipline, strength, and self-control, skills she understood intimately, from her own careful efforts to raise Ronan and Ren, without revealing their true nature to the wider world. The academy operated under strict security, its true purpose known only to a select few trusted individuals, though that security, Elena would soon discover, was not nearly as impenetrable as she had once believed. Draven had spent weeks gathering resources and loyal followers, still bitter over their own exile from various pacts throughout the region, promising them power and position in exchange for their assistance in a plan that would simultaneously destroy Cade's newfound happiness and secure Draven's own path back into relevance and influence. He had learned the location of Elena's academy easily enough, tracking careless mentions from symposium attendees who had no idea the information they casually shared could prove so dangerous in the wrong hands. The attack came on a quiet evening, nearly a month after the symposium had concluded, while Cade happened to be visiting the academy for one of his scheduled visits with the twins. Elena had just finished overseeing the final training session of the day, when the Academy's security alarms began blaring throughout the compound. A sound she had never once heard triggered in all her years running the institution. "Get the students to the safe rooms," Elena ordered immediately, her training instincts taking over without hesitation, as she rushed toward the main hall where Cade had been spending time with Ronan and Ren. She found Cade already alert, positioned protectively between the twins and the main entrance. His posture shifted into the sharp, controlled readiness of a king prepared to defend his family at any cost. "Draven," he said the moment Elena arrived, his voice carrying a dangerous edge she had rarely heard from him, even during his coldest years of rule. "I can smell him. He is here." Elena's blood ran cold at the confirmation, her protective instincts flaring instantly to life as she moved to gather Ronan and Ren close against her. "How did he find us?" she demanded, though there was no time to fully process an answer, as the sound of shattering glass echoed from somewhere within the compound. "There is no time to figure that out now," Cade said. "We need to get them somewhere safe immediately." Ronan, despite his young age, straightened his shoulders with a fierce, protective determination that mirrored both his parents' instincts combined. "I can help," he said firmly. "I am not afraid." "I know you are not," Elena said gently, cupping his face briefly with both hands. "But right now, the bravest thing you can do is stay safe with your sister. Let us handle this." Cade led them quickly toward a reinforced safe room hidden beneath the Academy's main training hall, a precaution Elena had insisted on installing years earlier, despite the significant expense, never imagining she would one day be grateful for such foresight. Once the twins were secured safely inside, guarded by two of Elena's most trusted senior instructors, Cade and Elena turned to face the growing threat together, moving through the compound's darkened hallways with practiced, synchronized precision that spoke to instincts neither of them had ever truly lost, despite 7 years of separation. They found Draven waiting in the Academy's central courtyard, flanked by a handful of loyal followers, his expression carrying the same calculated satisfaction Elena remembered from that terrible night 7 years earlier, though now tinged with the bitter desperation of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose in reclaiming it. "Well," Draven said, his voice carrying false pleasantness across the tense courtyard, "look at this touching little reunion. The king and his fallen Luna, playing happy family after everything I worked so carefully to destroy." "This ends tonight, Draven," Cade said, his voice low and controlled, despite the fury simmering visibly beneath his composed exterior. "You will not touch my family again." "Your family," Draven repeated with a bitter, humorless laugh. "The family you nearly destroyed with your own foolish pride. I simply gave your rage the excuse it was already searching for. Do not pretend I acted alone in this tragedy, Cade. You were far too eager to believe the worst of the woman who loved you." Elena felt Cade tense beside her, though he did not rise to Draven's deliberate provocation, his focus remaining sharply fixed on the immediate threat, rather than old wounds better addressed another time. "Whatever grievance you carry against me," Cade said, "it ends here. You will face formal judgment before the council for what you have done, both 7 years ago and tonight." Draven's expression darkened considerably at the mention of formal judgment, and Elena recognized immediately that he had come prepared for exactly this kind of confrontation, his followers shifting into ready positions around the courtyard's perimeter, cutting off easy paths of retreat. What followed was a tense, carefully controlled confrontation, Elena and Cade working in seamless coordination, despite 7 years apart, their movements instinctively synchronized in a way that spoke to a bond deeper than mere physical training could ever produce alone. Elena's academy instructors, alerted by the security alarms, arrived quickly to reinforce the defense, and within a relatively short time, Draven's small group of followers found themselves significantly outmatched and outnumbered. Draven, recognizing the shifting tide against him, attempted a final, desperate move toward the safe room where the twins remained hidden, clearly intending to use them as leverage to secure his own escape. But Ronan, despite his young age, had inherited far more of his parents' protective instincts and quiet strength than Draven had ever anticipated, and the reinforced safe room held firm against his attempted breach, buying precious time for Cade to intercept him before any real harm could occur. The confrontation ended with Draven successfully restrained and secured, his remaining followers scattered or captured by Elena's well-trained instructors, the academy grounds finally falling quiet once again as the immediate threat was fully neutralized. Elena rushed immediately to the safe room, her heart pounding with residual fear, until she saw Ronan and Ren emerge unharmed, both children rushing into her arms with a desperate, relieved embrace. "You were both so brave," Elena whispered, holding them tightly against her chest, tears of relief streaming freely down her face. "I am so proud of you both." Cade joined them moments later, his own expression carrying visible relief as he knelt down to check on the twins himself, his hand trembling slightly as he gently touched Ronan's shoulder. "You kept your sister safe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That took incredible courage." Ronan, exhausted but clearly proud of his own composure under such frightening circumstances, offered Cade a small, tentative smile, the first genuine warmth he had shown toward his father since their initial meeting weeks earlier. "We protected each other," he said simply, glancing toward Ren, who nodded in solemn agreement. As the night's chaos finally settled and Draven was formally handed over to await judgment before the Lycan Council, Elena found herself standing beside Cade once again, watching as their children, finally safe, curled together on a nearby bench, exhaustion overtaking their earlier fear. The shared danger of that terrifying night had accomplished something weeks of careful, patient visits had not yet fully achieved, forging a genuine bond of trust between Cade and his children, born not from forced obligation, but from the undeniable proof of a father willing to risk everything to keep them safe. "Thank you," Elena said quietly, watching Cade's gaze remain fixed protectively on the twins, even now that the danger had passed. "For tonight, for fighting for them. I will always fight for them," Cade said, turning to meet her eyes with a quiet, unwavering sincerity. "For all of you. I know I still have far to go before I earn your full trust again, Elena, but tonight, I hope you saw at least a glimpse of the man I am trying to become." Elena studied him for a long, thoughtful moment, 7 years of hard-won caution slowly giving way to a fragile, cautious hope she had not allowed herself to fully feel until this very moment. "I saw it," she admitted quietly. "I saw it clearly." In the weeks following the attack on the Academy, Draven stood before the full Lycan Council to answer for his crimes, both the manipulation and lies that had led to Elena's unjust exile 7 years earlier, and the dangerous attack he had orchestrated against the Academy and its students. The evidence against him, combined with testimony from his own captured followers eager to reduce their own punishment through cooperation, left little room for leniency. The Council stripped him permanently of any remaining pack affiliation and sentenced him to indefinite confinement, ensuring he would never again hold the power to manipulate or harm anyone within Lycan society. With Draven's threat finally and formally neutralized, Cade turned his full attention toward a different kind of reckoning, one focused not on punishment, but on restoration. He approached the Blackthorn Pack elders with a formal request, one he had been carefully considering since the night of the attack, watching Elena fight beside him with the same fierce loyalty and strength she had always carried, even after everything the pack had done to wrong her. "I wish to formally reinstate Elena as Luna of the Blackthorn Pack," Cade announced before the assembled elders, his voice carrying the same unwavering authority they had grown accustomed to over 7 years, though now tempered with a humility that had not existed in his rule before Elena's return. Not as an order she must accept, but as an invitation she is free to refuse, should she choose to. The elders, many of whom had come to deeply regret their silent complicity in Elena's unjust exile all those years ago, voiced immediate and unanimous support for the proposal, several offering formal apologies for their role in allowing Draven's lies to go unchallenged on that terrible night. Cade listened to each apology with careful attention, though he made clear that any true reconciliation would need to come directly from Elena herself, on whatever terms she found acceptable. He traveled to the Academy shortly after, finding Elena in her private office reviewing training schedules for the upcoming season, Ronan and Ren completing their own homework assignments at a nearby table, their relationship with their father having grown steadily warmer in the weeks since the attack, marked by regular visits, patient conversations, and the slow, careful rebuilding of trust between them. "I have a proposal for you," Cade said, once Elena had set aside her paperwork to give him her full attention. "But I want you to know up front that you are entirely free to say no, and I will respect whatever decision you make, without question or pressure." Elena raised an eyebrow, curious, despite the careful neutrality she maintained in her expression. "Go on," she said. I want to formally reinstate you as Luna of the Blackthorn Pack, Cade said. Not because pack law demands it, not because our children deserve recognized status as heirs, though both of those things remain true. I want this because you deserve to reclaim the title and respect that was stolen from you, through no fault of your own. And I want it because I have spent 7 years learning that I do not wish to rule, or to live, without you standing beside me, should you ever find yourself willing to consider that possibility again. Elena remained quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of his offer carefully. She thought of the pain of that terrible night, the humiliation of being cast out before an entire pack, the years of struggle and secrecy that had followed. But she also thought of the man who had fought fiercely to protect their children, who had patiently earned Ronan's trust and Ren's affection through consistent, genuine effort, rather than empty promises, who now stood before her offering not a command, but a choice. I need time, she said finally, honestly. This is not a decision I can make quickly, not after everything that happened. But I am willing to consider it, Cade. That is more than I believed myself capable of offering even a few months ago. That is more than enough, Cade said, genuine relief and gratitude softening his expression. Take whatever time you need. I will be here, whenever you are ready to talk further. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself spending more time at the Blackthorn Pack territory, initially through visits arranged around the twins' growing relationship with their father, but gradually extending into longer stays, as old friendships within the pack cautiously rekindled, and new bonds slowly began to form. She reconnected with Cade's mother, whose absence on that terrible night, Elena finally learned, had been deliberately orchestrated by Draven, through a carefully timed, false emergency, designed specifically to remove the one witness capable of clearing her name. I have regretted my absence every single day since, Cade's mother told her tearfully during one such visit. If I had been there, if I had spoken up, none of this suffering would have ever happened to you or the children. You could not have known what Draven was planning, Elena said gently, offering comfort despite her own lingering grief. We were all deceived by someone who spent months carefully building his trap. None of us could have easily seen through it. Ronan and Ren, meanwhile, continued growing more comfortable within pack territory, beginning to understand for the first time the full truth of their heritage, a truth Elena and Cade carefully explained together, patient and honest, allowing the twins to process the revelation of their true nature and future inheritance at their own pace. So we are part wolf? Ronan asked one evening, his golden eyes wide with a mixture of shock and undeniable excitement at the revelation. Like, we can actually transform? When you are old enough, and properly trained, yes, Cade confirmed, watching his son's reaction carefully. It is a significant responsibility, but also an incredible gift. Ren, characteristically more thoughtful in her response, studied her parents carefully, before asking the question that clearly weighed most heavily on her young mind. Does this mean people will not accept us either? She asked quietly, like what happened to Mother. Elena felt her heart clench at her daughter's perceptive, painfully relevant concern, kneeling down to meet her eyes directly. What happened to me was because people chose fear and lies over trust and truth, she said gently. That does not have to be your story. You get to decide what kind of pack you want to build, what kind of leaders you want to become, and your father and I will make absolutely certain that no one within our pack ever again allows lies to triumph over truth. Cade nodded firmly in agreement, kneeling beside Elena to address both children directly. I promise you both, he said, his voice carrying the full weight of solemn conviction. I will spend the rest of my life ensuring nothing like what happened to your mother ever happens again within our pack, to anyone. The twins seemed reassured by their parents' unified, heartfelt promise, and as the weeks continued passing, Elena found herself watching the careful, steady rebuilding of not just her children's relationship with their father, but her own relationship with the man she had once believed she could never forgive. It was not a swift or simple process, forgiveness rarely was, but with each patient, genuine gesture, each consistent act of accountability and change, Elena felt old wounds slowly beginning to heal, in ways she had never believed possible, in the immediate aftermath of that terrible, devastating night 7 years earlier. Nearly a year after that fateful night at the symposium, the Blackthorn Pack gathered once again within the Great Hall, the very same hall where Elena had once stood accused and broken, before an entire community that had failed to protect her. This time, however, the hall was filled not with cruel accusations and cold judgment, but with warmth, celebration, and the quiet, healing promise of a family finally made whole again. Elena stood at the center of the hall, dressed in flowing robes of deep green and gold, colors representing both her original title and her renewed place within the pack she had once believed lost to her forever. Cade stood beside her, his expression carrying none of the cold, guarded composure of that terrible night years earlier, replaced instead by open, unguarded love and profound gratitude for the second chance he had never truly believed himself deserving of receiving. Ronan and Ren stood just behind their parents, dressed in formal attire befitting their status as recognized heirs to the Blackthorn throne, their golden eyes bright with excitement and pride, rather than the wary caution that had once defined their earliest interactions with pack members and their own father alike. Over the past year, they had grown remarkably comfortable within pack life, embracing their training with enthusiasm, while never losing the gentle values Elena had carefully instilled during their years of hidden exile. 7 years ago, Cade began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the silent, attentive hall. I made the gravest mistake of my life. I allowed pride, rage, and manipulation to convince me that the woman who loved me unconditionally, who carried and later raised our children with unwavering strength and devotion, was somehow capable of the betrayal I too easily believed. I cast her out without allowing her the basic dignity of being truly heard, and in doing so, I nearly destroyed everything that ever mattered most in my life. The hall remained silent, every pack member listening intently, many with expressions of genuine remorse for their own silent complicity in that terrible injustice so many years earlier. Today, Cade continued, turning to face Elena directly, his voice softening considerably, I have the honor of correcting that grievous wrong. Not because pack law demands it, though it does, and not simply because our children deserve recognized status as rightful heirs, though they most certainly do. I do this because Elena has shown me, through her strength, her patience, and her willingness to allow me the chance to prove myself worthy again, what true loyalty and true love actually look like. He turned back toward the assembled pack, raising his voice once more. It is my honor to formally reinstate Elena as Luna of the Blackthorn Pack, a title she never should have lost, and one she has more than proven she deserves to hold once again. The hall erupted into warm, enthusiastic applause, pack members bowing respectfully as Elena stepped forward to formally accept her restored title, her eyes glistening with tears of hard-won relief and quiet triumph. She had not simply been given this moment, she had earned it through 7 years of resilience, strength, and unwavering dedication to protecting and raising her children with love, even when the entire world had once turned its back on her. I accept, Elena said, her voice steady and clear, despite the profound emotion coursing through her. Not because the title alone matters to me, but because I choose, freely and completely, to stand beside this pack, beside my children, and beside the man who has spent an entire year proving through consistent action, rather than empty words, that he is worthy of a second chance. She turned to face Cade fully, taking his hand in hers before the entire assembled pack. 7 years ago, you let fear and doubt destroy what we built together, she said, but I have watched you rebuild that trust, brick by careful brick, earning back not just our children's love, but mine as well. I choose you, Cade, not because fate or duty demands it, but because I want to. Cade's composed, regal bearing finally broke entirely at her words, raw, overwhelming emotion flooding across his features, as he pulled her gently into his arms, before the entire watching hall, a public reaffirmation of the bond that had survived betrayal, exile, and 7 long years of painful separation. Ronan and Ren rushed forward to join their embrace, the small family finally standing together, whole and unbroken, before a pack that had once failed them so completely, but now welcomed them home with genuine, heartfelt celebration. In the months that followed, Ronan and Ren began their formal training as future heirs to the Blackthorn throne, embracing both the responsibilities and privileges of their heritage with the same fierce determination and gentle wisdom that had defined their entire young lives. Ronan quickly distinguished himself through natural leadership and strategic thinking, while Ren's remarkable intuition and empathy made made her a natural mediator, often called upon even at her young age, to help resolve minor disputes among pack members, who had come to deeply respect her thoughtful, balanced perspective. Elena resumed her role as Luna, with the same grace and strength she had always carried, though now tempered by 7 years of hard-won independence and resilience, that made her an even more formidable and respected leader than she had been in her younger years. She maintained close ties with the academy she had built during her exile, ensuring its important work training gifted children continued under capable, trusted leadership even as her own responsibilities within the pack expanded significantly. Cade ruled alongside her with a renewed sense of humility and partnership, having learned through the most painful experience imaginable that true strength lay not in unquestioning authority, but in the willingness to listen, to trust, and to allow those he loved the space to speak their own truth, without fear of unjust judgment. Marcus, the kind doctor who had shown Elena such unwavering compassion during her darkest hour, remained a treasured member of the extended family, visiting regularly and continuing to serve as a beloved grandfather figure to Ronan and Ren, his simple, selfless kindness having played an immeasurable role in helping Elena survive and ultimately thrive during her years of hidden exile. As for Draven, he remained permanently confined, his ambitions and cruelty finally and completely neutralized, a distant, fading memory of the darkness that had once nearly destroyed an entire family, before ultimately, unexpectedly, helping to forge them into something even stronger, through the painful, hard-won lessons of survival, resilience, and the enduring power of unconditional love. Years later, when Ronan eventually ascended to lead the Blackthorn pack himself, he would often tell the story of his parents to his own children, a story not of a king who ruled through unquestioned power, but of a family that had faced the deepest betrayal imaginable and found its way back to wholeness through patience, accountability, and the unwavering belief that truth and love, given enough time and enough courage, could triumph over even the darkest lies. And Elena, watching her children grow into strong, compassionate leaders in their own right, never once regretted the long, difficult path that had brought her to this moment of profound, hard-won peace. For every tear shed during those 7 lonely years of exile, every sacrifice made to protect her children in secret, had ultimately led her not just back home, but to a deeper, more resilient version of herself, one capable of choosing love, not out of naive innocence, but out of hard-won wisdom and unshakable strength. The Blackthorn pack thrived in the years that followed, a community forever changed by the painful lessons of its past, forever strengthened by the enduring example of a Luna who had survived injustice with grace, and a king who had learned, through the deepest regret imaginable, that true leadership began with the courage to listen, to trust, and to always choose truth over the comfortable convenience of easy, cruel assumption.